All right. Hi, everybody. Punctual folks are rolling in. We'll allow a couple more minutes for people to arrive. But everyone is welcome to introduce themselves in the chat, share where you're from. If you're in Virginia, share what part. And if you're joining us from out of state, welcome. And you can introduce yourselves in the chat as well. We will get the Q&A feature up. If you've submitted a question ahead of time, we've got them and we're ready to provide answers toward the end of the program. But if you've got other questions, please go ahead and stick them in the Q&A and we will have a nice, robust Q&A session at the end. Illinois, look at that. Hello. All right, we're up to 30, Deb, so I think we can probably get started. All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Liz White. I'm the Executive Director of UpVote Virginia. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit organization working to elevate the voices of Virginia voters through democracy reforms that make for a healthier democracy in our Commonwealth. And our focus right now is expanding the use of ranked choice voting across the Commonwealth. So we will be doing a lot of voter education because it is a relatively new conversation in Virginia, and voter education and understanding really is key. So we'll be doing lots of programming like this on RCV, or instant runoff voting as it's also sometimes called. This webinar is being recorded and it'll be shared publicly. So if you have friends who missed it, don't worry, let them know that they have an opportunity to see it. This information is going to be evergreen, so it'll be really hopefully useful to folks down the road. So at this moment in time, the only laws on the books in Virginia about using ranked choice voting are the laws that allow localities, cities and counties, not towns, but cities and counties, to adopt ranked choice voting for the elections for their city councils or board of supervisors. That local governing body just has to take a majority vote, and that's it. That is the last legal hurdle for getting a locality to adopt RCV. Arlington County is the first locality in Virginia to opt into this, and they will be using, the Arlington Democrats will be using ranked choice voting in their primary contest for the county board seats on June 20th. Now, Arlington has a bit of an interesting way in electing their county board. They have a 5-member board. They are all at-large seats, and they elect one county board member every year, except every 4th year, which is this year, they elect 2. So now you have a ranked choice voting election with multiple winners, and the voter experience is the same, but the back-end tabulation is a little bit different, and we wanted to delve into that to make sure people understand. Arlington's certainly not the only locality in Virginia who has multi-winner elections. Cities like Charlottesville and Alexandria have at-large city councils, and they elect multiple members at a time. Again, the list is long, so this is relevant information for a lot of regions in the Commonwealth. So I have invited Deb Otis to be with us. Deb is the Director of Research for FairVote. With a decade of experience in research and analytics, Deb is passionate about sharing the data-driven case for why our country needs election reform. In addition to ranked choice voting and proportional representation, Deb's areas of research, which are many, include comparative electoral systems, political polarization, redistricting, representation for women and people of color, the Electoral College, and election recounts. Deb is a graduate of Boston University with degrees in economics and physics, and she lives in Washington, D.C. So Deb, thank you so much for joining us. We are thrilled to have you, and I'm going to hand the program over to you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here and thrilled for this upcoming use in Arlington County. And I noticed several folks sounding off in the chat already from Arlington. So looking forward to you all getting your first use of ranked choice voting. So I think the goal today is I'm going to start out with a sort of 101 presentation on what ranked choice voting means for multi-winner elections. And then from there, we'll have lots of time to answer everyone's questions and I'll be on the same page. As Liz says, these every 4 years, you've got this multi-winner election in Arlington County. And so when you have the chance to implement ranked choice voting, doing it in the multi-winner context brings even more benefits than you typically get from single winner races. When we look at kind of the standard ranked choice voting, you get a great list of benefits like winners with consensus support, improved representation, lack of the spoiler effect, et cetera. Ranked choice in multi-winner elections offers even more than that. And so I'm going to go ahead and share screen. I've got some slides to start us off. This is just to make sure everyone's on the same page about exactly how this works. And then we'll get into the Q&A. I know folks have some really detailed questions about how this method works and what kind of benefits it's going to bring. So this will be exciting. Let me just get into full screen here. Okay, should be seeing these slides at this point. So multi-winner ranked choice voting. First up, I'm just going to briefly talk about what it means to have winner take all versus proportional voting, because multi-winner ranked choice voting is a form of proportional voting. And so just some quick level setting here about what it means to move kind of away from a winner take all concept into a proportional voting concept. And so in winner take all elections, the largest group of the electorate controls 100% of the representation. If you move to proportional type systems, you get a reflective group of winners kind of reflecting the different groups. And so the key thing about proportionality to remember is that it preserves majority rule. If there is a majority, they get the most seats, but it also has a seat at the table for voices from minority factions. So we preserve majority rule and we are fair to all voices. And so when we look at multi-winner ranked choice voting, this is a form of proportional voting. And of course, you all are just going to do it in primary elections for these upcoming county board seats. So we're not talking about party proportionality, because the Democrats are going to use this and they're going to nominate Democrats, right? This is all within one party. So let's talk more about what it means and how it's going to work in the party context. So quickly, what is it? It's a ranked voting method. It means voters get to rank the candidates in order of preference. The typical ballot style and what you all will see if you're voting in Arlington County is a grid style ballot, like what you see in the image on the right here. And how are the winners decided? This is where it's different from what you may have heard if you like single winner, like if you've been following the Alaska method. This is something different because this is multi-winner. And so there's a victory threshold. Y'all are electing 2 seats. Everybody both candidates who cross that victory threshold will get one of those 2 seats. And this is nominations in this case. For single winner ranked choice voting, you have that majority threshold. You would need 50%. But if you're electing more than one person, the threshold goes down. This is what makes it proportional. The threshold gets lower so that you can have multiple people cross that threshold and get a seat. And so I'll show what the different thresholds look like here. When we're electing 1 seat, like single standard ranked choice, the threshold is 50% plus 1 vote, right? You need 1/2 of the votes if there's 1 seat. Well, if there are 2 seats available, you need 1/3 of the votes plus 1 vote. 3 seats, you need 1/4 of the seats. And so this is how the threshold changes. It is always based on the number of seats to be elected. And so for you all in Arlington County, we are looking at the 2-seat row because that's what you all have coming up this summer. Let's talk about how the seats are filled. How do we get our winners? Now we know the threshold. How do we count the ranked ballots to get 2 winners? My standard slideshow is actually an example with a 3-winner election. And so we'll look at that real quick. But then of course, for you all, for folks voting in Arlington, it's going to be a 2-winner. So just like the other kinds of ranked choice you might have heard about, it's counted over rounds where everybody's vote counts for their first choice in the first round. And so this is an example for a 3-winner election. And so I've got my dotted line at my threshold here. Anyone who crosses that threshold gets a seat. And so I'm going to show how we get 3 winners in a 3-winner election. After we count up everybody's first choices, I see one of the candidates has crossed the threshold. So they're going to get one of the 3 seats. They have already won a seat, but they got more votes than they need. So what this really means, well, this Plum candidate is popular. They're connecting well with voters, so good for them. But it also means this faction that supported this purple candidate, there are a lot of voters out there who want candidates like this on their city council or county board or whatever elected body. And so if we're trying to be proportional about it, we'd better check, is that faction big enough that they actually deserve 2 seats? Are there enough of them that they deserve more than 1 seat? And so we're going to introduce something here called surplus transfer. Now, this is where this method gets different than your single winner. In single winner, you just eliminate the last place person because that would be a wasted vote. You don't want to waste a vote. In this method, we're also going to say, if you are a Plum voter and Plum has already crossed the threshold, an extra vote for Plum is also a wasted vote. The point of this method is to make sure everyone has the full power of their vote. You get 1 vote, 1 whole vote, and it counts impactfully so that you get to impact the result of an election. Now, we don't want folks wasting votes on a candidate who already won. And so that's where the surplus comes in. So this extra top of the purple bar, it goes across the threshold there. Those are the surplus votes. I'm going to transfer those to those people's second choices. So this is what that looks like. I kind of modeled a 2-party system here. So you see we have a lot of purple candidates and a couple of orange candidates. So imagine 2 parties. Most of those purple voters, they went to another purple candidate as their second choice, but a few of them crossed party lines. A few of them decided to, go rank an orange as their second. So this is round 2. We've got 2 winners, but this was a 3-winner election. And so we need to find out who's our third winner. With no surplus votes to transfer, I go back to our old fallbacks from regular ranked choice, where you eliminate the last place candidate and transfer to those people's second choice. So this is Lavender, one of my purple candidates, is in last place. So I'm going to eliminate, transfer those ballots. And those mostly went to the other purple candidate. We got some strong polarization in this electorate, but a few crossed party lines there. And so now we have 3 candidates above the threshold. So we have our 3 winners. And so the point here is that each voter gets 1 vote, but your vote is going to count for a candidate where it can mean something. Your vote goes to a candidate that you can help win. If your first choice was someone who either can't win or already won even without your help, you get your second choice. So you get 1 full vote, same as everybody else. And that's what I love about this. It puts voters on equal footing instead of saying, if you voted for some underdog, then your vote, it doesn't really count between the finalists, right? And so in this case, we kind of had our 2 parties. We had I'm going to skip back to round 1 real quick. This was first choices. Most voters here were of the purple party. And so once we've got our winners, most of the winners were purple, with fair representation also for orange. And so that's kind of how the proportionality works out. And so that's just how votes get counted. I see, how do I decide which votes are surplus? A couple of folks had this question. That's a really good question. So let's talk about that. Oops, click in the wrong direction. So back to this area, when I've got this bar that I'm going to transfer. So this is not I didn't just take a stack of ballots off of the top of the stack and just, distribute those to their second choice, because that kind of introduces some randomness and then begs the question, which ballots? So this is what's called a fractional transfer method. It means, instead of taking a stack of ballots off the top, a random stack, this takes a fraction of every ballot that ranked Plum first. Think of it like, I use the dollar analogy. Think about if your vote was $1 and it only costs 90 cents to help elect your first choice candidate, you would want to be able to spend that extra 10 cents on your second choice. And so that's how the fraction works. There are some really good videos about this online, and I can provide some links on that. It's based on a formula. This is the formula that's in use, say, in Australia, where they've been doing this for 100 years. And I'll be happy to kind of send some resources out on that afterwards if folks have additional questions. Just remember, it is 1 whole vote, right? So you're getting the same amount of vote as everybody else. This is a 1 person, 1 vote situation. And that's kind of one of the keys to how this tabulation works. So I'm going to go ahead and move along. Feel free to keep questions coming. If I see anything in the chat, I'll address it. Otherwise, Liz and I will have plenty of time at the end to get into questions. Okay, where is this already used? This is used in just a handful of cities so far, but a lot of these are kind of newer ones where folks have started adopting this in the last few years after seeing the success from single winner ranked choice voting. And a lot of these are places just like Arlington County, where you're saying, I'm interested in ranked choice voting, but I've got these multi-winner offices. What do I do about these? And so several of these implementations are just like yours, where they're doing this to make sure they're getting their multi-winner offices right. And then, of course, there's Arlington in our coming soon list. In just a couple of months, I'll put you on the map officially. And so I wanted to show a couple of examples of where this is being used already. Cambridge, Massachusetts has had it since the 1940s. And so we have a lot of data about how it's working, how people are liking it, and how people are using the ballot. One of my favorite stats is that 95% of people see one of their top 3 choices elected. So some people will rank more candidates than that, but almost everybody is getting one of their top 3. And that's a function of, being able to elect multiple winners. So this is cool. We also see, most voters are choosing to rank rather than just pick one. So, voters are understanding it and liking it. And my favorite, I'm going to show a map of Cambridge here. I call this the neighborhood representation map. They're electing 9 people with this method, and they're all elected citywide. Cambridge does not have districts on their city council, but if you look at the map, it kind of looks like districts. And so I just think this is cool because it shows that voters were still getting neighborhood representation. And so the colors here, each of the geographies is one precinct in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the color is which of the city council candidates got the most first choice votes. And so like the blue candidate, a lot of the precincts where they did really well are all sort of on one side of the city and so on. And so with proportional ranked voting, you get these kind of neighborhood representations as different factions get representation. Portland, Oregon is just about to start using this. They passed it by ballot measure. They will start using it in a couple of years. They're going to have 4 districts that each elects 3 people. And so you all, since you're electing a smaller number of people for the county board, you're doing it citywide. But this is an option that Portland is doing because they need to elect 12 people to their council and they don't want to elect them all citywide. So they're doing 4 districts of 3, and they're expecting strong proportionality to come out of each of these 3 districts. So balance of neighborhood and citywide, fair representation for communities of color, etc. This is a cool implementation. We're almost done here. I'll quickly talk about how this advances voting rights concerns. So I want to briefly touch on the Voting Rights Act. Since the Federal Voting Rights Act went into effect, places are mandated to not have vote dilution of communities of color. And so this means communities of color should be able to fairly elect candidates of choice. And when a place it demonstrates that they are not doing that, then they are doing vote dilution and they get hit with a lawsuit. And so when California passed a state Voting Rights Act, hundreds of municipalities got hit with these lawsuits saying, oh, well, your city is only electing white people to city council, even if you're in a diverse city. And so they all went to district models, like they drew districts for their city councils. But sometimes districts don't work. Imagine a city where you don't have different populations in different neighborhoods. Imagine people are really living all interspersed. How would you draw a fair district? Sometimes you can't. And so that's why some folks are using citywide proportional ranked choice voting or multi-winner ranked choice, just like what Arlington County is doing, in order to ensure fair representation for multiple different groups. This does not have to be a zero-sum game here. If one group is doing well, that doesn't mean everyone else has to be shut out. We can have a system where one group is doing well and other groups are also doing well too, or at least doing okay. And so that's what we're seeing interest in, using this method to solve voting rights challenges. It first happened in Michigan a couple of years ago. Instead of choosing to draw districts for their city, when they got hit with one of these lawsuits saying you've been diluting votes, they went to citywide multi-winner ranked choice to solve their voting rights problem. And then a couple more cities since then have done the same. And so this is a demonstrated solution to ensure when you're electing multiple people that you're getting reflective outcomes. And so lastly, you all, this is exciting. This is kind of unique, getting to do this in a primary. As far as I know, this is the first time in our country that multi-winner ranked choice is used for a party primary election. And so I think this is really cool. And so what does it mean exactly? Well, so I know that the Democrats for sure are doing this to select 2 nominees. So of course, they're both going to be Democratic candidates, right? But the interesting thing here, they will both be elected by kind of a different group of voters. In the old methods, if you were voting in a vote for 2 kind of election, which is typical when you're electing 2 people, if there is one group that makes up a majority, they can control every single seat. But in this, you're kind of going to get different groups reflected. And so if I had to make a guess about who's going to, win these 2 Democratic Party nominations, I would suspect that they might be Democrats from different parts of the county, for example, or maybe they would be people who sort of reflect different ideologies within the Democratic Party. But it's likely you're going to have a little bit of diversity within the 2 nominees in Arlington County. And so I think that's going to be really interesting, and I'm looking forward to it. So that's kind of the 101 presentation. I'm going to stop screen sharing. I know we've had some questions come in. Liz and I are both excited to dive into these. I'll learn more together. I'll hand it back to Liz.
So that was wonderful, Deb. Thank you so much. I did not know that Arlington was going to be such a trailblazer. I knew they were a trailblazer within Virginia, but I had no idea we were doing something completely unique in the US. That's so exciting. I guess all eyes are on that election even more than we knew. There are several questions in the chat. I think just looking for more clarity on the math on the back end tabulation. And I know that when I was learning about multi-winner RCV and single transferable vote, this was where it took me a few tries to get my mind around it as well. So I feel for everyone listening. Can we talk a little bit more about the math and get into the fractions of it all?
Yeah, fractional transfer is a little bit weird. And I feel like whenever I even bring up the term, I sort of have to apologize for it. But this exists for a reason. If we didn't use the fractional transfer, then you would be choosing the ballots at random that get transferred. And what if you didn't pick a representative sample? It could actually change who wins. And this came from not wanting to introduce any randomness into who wins our elections. This needs to be based on voter preference only, not when I shuffled the stack of ballots and picked 10, which 10 did I get? And so that's why the fraction exists. It exists for a good reason. But yes, it is a little weird to wrap our brains around. I'll go back to the dollar example one more time. If your vote was $1 and you only needed 90 cents to elect your favorite candidate, this method takes that extra 10 cents for you and redistributes it to your second choice. So you've already marked on your ballot who's your second choice. And then if your first choice got too many votes, they got more than they needed, then the algorithm, kind of de-weights that down to just the amount they needed and lets you have your change back. Your 10 cents change that you didn't need to spend, gives that back to your ballot to be transferred to your second choice. And that's the way that everybody gets 100% of their vote, your fully impactful vote.
And you're not punished for supporting a popular candidate.
Right.
Can you, again, this is trying to balance between getting really in the weeds, but really making sure we thoroughly answer everybody's questions. How do you arrive at the number? How do you know that your vote only costs 90 cents?
Yeah, so the fraction is the amount of votes that the candidate needed divided by the amount that they got. maybe it's the other way. It's just a division of those
those
two
are the factors.
Numbers. Yep. And so so every ballot that ranked that candidate first, their new weight, their weight for their second choice is multiplied by that same fraction. That's just a function of those two numbers. How many votes did they need and how many did they actually get? And yes, there was a question, can software do this? Yeah, all of the major manufacturers in the US are ranked choice compatible and use a software solution. It's done in a second. Once you hit go on the button, once you've got your ballots processed, it just spits it out for you, and it produces a nice like round by round count where we can check and kind of go back and see exactly what happened.
So we've got some good consolidation of all of this in the chat. I'm going to start with Diana's. With your dollar example, does that mean that 10%, if you vote for the first place candidate, 10% of her second choice vote goes to her second choice candidate? 10% of her vote goes to her second choice candidate.
That's correct, but your second choice candidate will still have a bunch of first choices from people that liked them best. I mean, I'll use a presidential example because we all sort of remember that, right? If your first choice was, well, I guess we only elect one president. Maybe that's not a good example. We need a congressional example. Look, if your first choice wins, and so you're getting your 10 cents, your 10% of your vote transferred to your second choice, that's now being added to a stack for your second choice candidate. There was already a stack there because some people had that candidate first, and their ballot hasn't been de-weighted because they haven't gotten a candidate they want yet. So their ballot's counting for full value for their first choice candidate. Your little fraction is being added on top. So you already got one candidate you like. So you're at a fraction now. Did that make sense? Two precedents.
I think so too. I mean, thought. So all of the second choices. So anybody over the limit, all those votes, that excess, that fraction that's been determined by the individual numbers related to that election, how many votes are needed, how many votes were cast, that is how you determine what gets reallocated. And then I don't even know that we've spent so much time on what gets reallocated from the top. There is still reallocation from the bottom, like single winner RCV, right?
Yeah, anytime so we always allocate extra votes first. So transfer your surplus first. But if you've done that, you don't have any more surplus and you don't yet have all of the winners, that's when you do the kind of standard thing. Eliminate last place, transfer those ballots.
So you eliminate from the top first. So yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I like your dollar example a lot. I'm scrolling back through the chat to make sure. I feel like we're in a good place on this, but I also put in the chat a link to a video. It's the animal kingdom, and it's Queen Lion and her figuring out the best way to run her animal kingdom council. I find it very helpful. It goes into the fractions, it goes into the tabulation, and it goes into the proportional representation piece of it. It's about 7 minutes long, but that is in the chat, and I will send it out with follow-up materials as well. And I know, Deb, you said you have some other resources. So if you need to just hear it a couple more times, that's a good place to go. So Shane asked if it's possible to hand count ballots for multi-winner RCV. I mean, as we look at election, and we had a couple questions also about kind of gaming the system. So I would love to talk about, in a block, the security concerns or security measures with proportional RCV or multi-winner RCV.
Yeah, it is possible to hand count, but it gets a little tricky, and you do have to introduce the math. And so it's not my recommended method. Plenty of literature on elections finds that machine counts are more accurate than hand counts. And so my recommended method is to do machine counting for ranked choice races and then pair them with some kind of election audit where you examine a small number of ballots by hand to determine that your machines were working correctly. So it's possible to hand count, but it's not my recommended method.
Okay, and is it possible to strategize to the point that either as a candidate or as a block of voters, you could influence the outcome to, could you game the system with this kind of system?
In general, with ranked choice methods, the best strategy for a voter is to vote honestly. Rank your honest first, second, and third choices. And then the best strategy for a campaign is to try to be ranked first as much as possible. The ranked choice voting.
Try to win. Oh, it's a good strategy.
Yeah, try to win. But most of the time, most ranked choice winners are the people that got the most first choice votes. And then they go on to consolidate that strong lead. So your campaign strategy is still connect with voters, turn out your base, get your votes, but also have broad appeal. And so typically, I'd say there's not much strategy involved. I keep saying typically, there's kind of an asterisk with Arlington County because there is going to be a limit on the number of rankings used. And I know some people have had questions, or I saw that mentioned, I think in the Q&A already. You're going to be limited to only use 3 rankings, even when there are more than 3 candidates running, because it's a limitation on the equipment that the county currently has. And so
it's not a limitation on the number of candidates. I think that's a really important thing too. As many people can run as want to run. It does not limit them. There are already, I think, 5 who are either declared or in the process of entering the race.
Yeah. And so if there are 5 candidates on the ballot and each voter only has the option to rank up to 3 of them, there might be a tiny amount of strategy there. I would say if you think there are 2 strong candidates and 3 underdogs, try to rank one of the 2 strong candidates somewhere on your ballot. Remember your vote counts for a candidate who has a chance of winning. I think if there are 5 candidates and 3 rankings allowed, you should be good to go because we're electing 2 people. And so I think you're going to have a vote count for one of the active candidates, but to make sure that you're getting the full power of your vote, I'd say if you think there are 3 underdogs, don't rank all 3 underdogs as your only 3. Get one of the front runners somewhere in there, maybe as your last choice if you just need to put one. So when you're rank limited, I'd say there's a tiny amount of strategy. Does that make sense?
I think so, because one of the things we always talk about, one of the benefits of ranked choice voting in general, is that it allows voters to vote honestly, as you said, and to vote for a candidate that really speaks to them, as opposed to having to be pundits. RCV prevents all of us, especially folks who are on this kind of call on a Monday afternoon. We watch all the news, we read all of the analysis, we read the polls, and then we try to guess how our fellow voters are going to vote. And we become pundits and we vote accordingly. The number of people who say, well, I really like this person, but I don't think that person can win the primary or win in a general or whatever it is. And RCV takes that pressure off of us. So I would say if the 3 underdogs are the only candidates you like, do your thing. Vote honestly, vote for who you like. But I think Deb is right. This is kind of the only time that any of that strategy is going to come into play in an RCV election. And it also depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to cast your support for those 3 underdogs because they're who you like and they're who speaks to what you care about, go for it. Go for it. It's no different than casting your vote for the candidate you really like in a single winner plurality election. So, okay. Yes, to I think elaborate on why Arlington has a limit of 3, the voting system they use, the ballot design, it is literally a matter of there's no more width for more columns. It is as basic as that. And I think we will find as more localities and states and governments start using ranked choice voting, the demand for more robust technological support will increase, and that kind of thing will be addressed. So there are 4 voting systems in Virginia, and at least this one that is used in Arlington, and several other localities currently limit it to 3. But I would guess as they continue to evolve their software, that will not be a permanent problem. And then Nancy asked, in Alexandria has 6 members of city council, forgive me for not remembering, are they elected all at the same time from Alexandria? Let's say they are for this example. Yes, thanks, Brian. So if we're electing 6 candidates all at once, what does that look like, Deb? And what kind of would the 3 ranking limit be a stumbling block, or would it actually be a problem?
I'd say with a 6-member city council, you got 2 good options. One, you could elect all 6 people citywide, get 6 winners. If you had 6 open seats, you'd probably have 12 candidates running. A good rule of thumb is you're going to draw about twice as many candidates as seats. And so we could let voters rank among those 12 candidates to get 6 winners. In that case, because it's such a big field, I think the 3 ranking limit would feel a little bit stifling for voters. It would feel like you can't express your full preferences. So my recommendation, if Alexandria wants to do this, would probably be divide into 2 districts, have like an East Alexandria district of 3 members and a West Alexandria district of 3. And then you would be electing 3 people at a time from districts. And so you kind of get that neighborhood representation as well. But I'll also echo what Liz said here about the election machines catching up. My understanding is that that most counties in Virginia are slated to do upgrades pretty soon. And so I think this 3 rank limit really is going out of fashion fast.
Yeah, yes, I would agree with that. So for now, I mean, the Arlingtonians on this call, I think your voice will still be heard, and it will still be heard in a more complete and thorough and nuanced way with this system, even with the limited rankings, than it would be in a plurality election. Deb, can we talk really quickly, because I've heard it from a couple people in Arlington. One of the things we talk about with single winner RCV is someone has to hit that 50% threshold. Someone has to hit that majority, and you get majority rule, and that's such a great selling point. And obviously that's not the case in a multi-winner district, because you can't elect 3 candidates all with 50% of the vote if everyone gets $1 worth of vote. Can you just talk a little bit about how, I think you mentioned it in your slides, but reiterate how the voting threshold is determined and why that is still okay in a multi-winner system?
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as how the threshold is determined and on the math, I just saw Shane in the chat gave a good concrete example of it. Shane is showing the math here for a particular example. That's exactly how it's calculated. And so, yeah, that's where the number comes from. But what does it mean to have a threshold less than 50%? Well, if the threshold was 50%, then the majority would win every seat, right? Imagine a group, a city that is, 60% one faction or one party, 40% another faction. As long as you are stuck in a majoritarian system, any system that demands a majority, then that 60% faction could win 100% of the seats. If you're only electing one person at a time, that's appropriate. The biggest faction should win. But when you're electing multiple people, I am a strong proponent of systems that inject some amount of proportionality. If you are about 60% of the voting population, you should have about 60% of the seats, in my opinion. So anytime we're electing multiple people, I think we should do away with the idea of majority and come to a consensus on proportionality. So majority rule, but also minority seats at the table.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Some of these other questions that we've received ahead of time are, they're a little more general RCV questions than they would apply to multi-winner and to single winner elections. But one of the big ones that I get a lot is what do the opponents say? What are the talking points against RCV?
The biggest maybe downside or concern is that this feels new and different. I mean, when I wanted to tell you how the votes are counted, I had to use bar charts, right? This adds a layer of complexity. And we have to acknowledge that our old voting method was just kind of the most basic primitive way to kind of aggregate votes and try to get a winner. but we know our old voting method was not working for delivering outcomes that the voters were asking for. It was not making candidates and elected officials responsive to the voters. And so in order to get better outcomes, I am arguing we should accept that small increase in complexity there. But that is, it requires a bit of voter education. There's typically a voter education budget, and some money gets spent the first time that a city adopts this method.
I agree. I would think that most of the concerns that we hear are either can be addressed with voter education, but it's new and scary and confusing, and there need to be software upgrades, or there need to be training for election officials. And all of these are very real considerations, but they're also threshold problems. They're not policy problems, and they're not perpetual problems. They are learning curve problems. So they are, again, very real considerations. And I think most of the places like Alaska, where you see an overwhelming majority of voters said this was easy, this was simple, I liked it, you also see that almost all of them report receiving some kind of information and training ahead of time. But I think that is the biggest bucket. I agree with you, Deb. The biggest bucket of pushback that I hear is just that it's too complicated for voters. And I think voters are very smart, and I think voters can handle this. I will say one of the subsections of the bucket, of the confusing concern bucket, is about the voters, low information voters, who it's hard enough in a local election, especially if you have a crowded ballot or if you have many races going on at the same time, and they're not presidential or Senate or congressional and things that get a lot of TV airtime. A lot of voters go into those elections not knowing who any of the candidates are. And now we want them to not just pick one, we want them to pick 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can you talk about that concern a little bit?
Yeah, that's a real concern. I think the best advice that we give in terms of voter education, the messages you need to hammer home are, 1, you can rank as many or as few as you want. If you only know one candidate, or if you only like one candidate, it's okay to just pick that one. Your vote will still count for them. But if you choose to rank, it can give your vote even more power. And so, nobody's being disenfranchised if they just vote for one. However, some people think there might be strategy involved. And so this message that ranking a second choice will not hurt your first choice. It's not like taking votes away from them. Your second choice only goes to help if your first choice doesn't need that vote. Those are the messages that help make people feel confident that they know how to rank and that their vote is going to count as they intended.
Right. I think that's excellent. A couple more questions I'm seeing in the chat. Instant runoff voting is the same thing as the single winner ranked choice voting. All it means is that, and actually it's a really helpful way, I think, to explain it to folks. Instead of what we saw in Georgia, where there were 3 candidates and the third party candidate or the independent candidate got just enough of the vote share that no one got to 50%, he gets eliminated and everyone has to come back in a month and vote again. What you're seeing now is how the vote count would shake out if he hadn't been there in the first place, which is what you would have seen in an RCV election. It just would have been all on the same night, because when you are ranking your second choice candidate, what you're being asked to do is imagine a scenario where your first choice candidate isn't in the race anymore, isn't an option. So I think the instant runoff framework is a very helpful and tangible way to think about how the votes are tabulated in a single winner election. And sometimes it is a preferable term. It depends on who you're talking to, but it definitely is a helpful framework, helpful way to explain. That goes, I had a question, I think in the early submissions, about the best elevator speech for this, because we've talked about it for 43 minutes already, and we're only addressing a tiny fraction of this. We could talk for days. Deb and I could talk for days. Don't give us the chance. But I have found in talking to voters, particularly voters who've never heard of this before, it is most helpful to focus on the voter experience piece of it. If you want to delve into the math, I mean, my God, especially on the multi-winner, but even the single winner elections, talking about reallocating the votes, that's where people get a little confused. But if you say, instead of going into the ballot box or the voting booth and picking just your favorite candidate, which if it's a crowded election could lead to someone winning with 30% of the vote, which means 70% of voters wanted someone else, you get to say, this is my first favorite, my second favorite, my third favorite, etc. And if your favorite isn't everybody else's favorite, you still get a say in the final outcome. Your vote counts for more, and you end up with someone who had to appeal on some level to more than half of the voters. And people get that. The majority rule part of it, again, with single winner elections, but we've seen these elections where someone wins with 30% of the vote and 70% are varying levels of disgruntled. And we all, that resonates, I think, with all of us, where we go, oh, well, I don't feel heard at all. And we all have experienced probably an election where the person who spoke to us isn't the person who had the polling behind them, and we were all playing pundit. So I find focusing, I've just given you a very long elevator speech, but I think focusing on those two parts of it and focusing on how easy it is for the voter. We all rank all the time. So going and saying my first favorite, my second favorite, my third favorite is not difficult. Voters can do that. And, we'll use restaurant examples. We'll use, what's your favorite pizza topping examples? We have one on our website. It's excellent. And of course, there's an emotional component behind it. There are real stakes behind it. So it's not quite a one-to-one comparison with an example like that, but we still have the capacity, just as people who are used to a lot of choices, we all have the capacity to say, this is my favorite, and then to imagine a scenario where that favorite is not an option. So again, that was a very long elevator ride, but those are the points I tend to hit. And people go, oh, and then if they want to know more about the math and we really want to delve into the weeds, you can. But that tends to be how people understand how it will affect them and their voting experience. Mike Cantwell would like to know if redheads have an advantage in RCV elections. Is that what brought us to this work, Deb?
They at least have an advantage in explaining RCV elections, clearly.
Certainly on this call. Yes. Let's see. I'm trying to go back through and make sure that we're getting everybody. Someone asked about expressed concern over multi-jurisdictional elections, and obviously that is probably a whole separate webinar, but I will say in Virginia at this time, what we learned during the General Assembly session, Senator Deeds pulled his bill that would have allowed political parties to use ranked choice voting for their presidential primaries. And the reason for that is that, as I mentioned, Virginia uses 4 different election systems because each of our localities gets to choose which vendor they want to use. So each of those 4 vendors, each of those 4 systems produces their data, their cast vote record in a different file format. The tabulation software that is being used, that the state has contracted with, that each locality can use, it's compatible with all 4, but not all 4 at the same time. That piece is missing, and it's forthcoming, but it was a tight enough timeline that everyone involved was nervous about rolling that out on such a big scale when it hadn't been done before. So I hope that helps. So multi-jurisdictional RCV elections are not currently possible in Virginia, but they are, I think, on everybody's radar. What else? Can you talk a little bit, Deb, about the time frame involved in counting RCV ballots? Is it different in single winner, multi-winner? Is it different when you factor in mail-in ballots and provisional ballots and things like that?
Yeah, so in a small geographic jurisdiction, like a single county, it is very easy to get all of the ballots into one place and, tabulate them quickly. Once the ballots are in hand, you press go on the tabulator and it's a second to get the results. Some places take longer, of course, to get full results because of delays with mail or for other reasons. One example I would point to is San Francisco, California. They have had ranked choice voting for about 15 years now, and they have a lot of mail-in voting in their state. And so they tend to have about half of the ballots on hand on election night, between people that dropped on a drop box, a small number of people that vote in person, and people that mailed their ballot early enough that it's already been processed by election day. So it's a ranked choice election, but they only have half the ballots on election night. And so what they do, they go ahead and process those they go ahead and do the ranked choice voting tabulation. So with the ballots they have on hand, they go ahead and run the tally, and they publish the results saying, hey, you know, this was only 50% reporting, but here's what the ranked choice tabulation would look like. And then each day, as they get more ballots in, they update it. And that matches, I think, the way people treat non-ranked choice elections. You know, we're on election night, we refresh the results and we say, oh, only 30% are reporting in this state, but I can see how those 30% of people voted, right? Like, people are releasing these election results as they go. And so that is being done in ranked choice races as well, like San Francisco. That's what I consider best practice. However, some places wait until they have every single ballot in hand before running the ranked choice at all. That's what Alaska did, and it took them 3 weeks before running the ranked choice tally, because they have a generous time period in a rural state for all those ballots to come back in through the mail. I think that leaves a lot of people hanging. I prefer kind of running the tabulation as you go, but those are both options. I think for a single county, it'll be easy enough. You'll just have most of the ballots on hand, and so you can just get going.
And I think that goes back to the question about concerns about RCV. I've heard a lot of people say, well, it just takes so long to get the results, which is potentially a concern in and of itself. But I think I've heard concerns that someone could mess with the votes and the data in that meantime, or it'll just have people lose faith in elections. And I think that a lot of that comes down to the communication and the expectation setting done in the voter education piece. The Virginia Republican Party used RCV for their statewide nominating contests in 2021, their governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. And they did a very good job of setting those expectations, of saying, this is not going to be available instantaneously. We are counting these votes today. We'll have results in this time frame, and I think that helps set expectations. Which that leads into, I think that in Virginia, people really were concerned about that long time frame for the counting and the tabulating. I think part of that is because our two most prominent examples were that statewide nominating contest on the Republican side and the Alaska elections. And as Deb said, Alaska gives 2 full weeks for ballots to come in because it is huge and rural. And a lot of people use the mail-in option, and sometimes it takes the mail a while. Ice has to thaw. I mean, it's a whole thing. But that law predates their RCV system by a long time. And then the Republican Party chose to hand count their ballots to address any election integrity concerns and make sure that everyone felt confident in how those results were reached. So that took a long time. So the two examples we're seeing both have extenuating circumstances that make it take a long, long time. But the actual tabulation, as Deb said, once you have all the votes, once you have all the ballots, it is a click of a mouse. It's a push of a button, and the software does it as instantly as it does with a plurality election. So I'm trying to go through the chat, make sure I'm not missing anybody. Deb, Ken asks a question about 2-seat elections. If I'm in a locality with 65% support for Party A and 35% for Party B, and a 2-seat election, there's 2 or more candidates who are attractive to Party A, but there's only one who's attractive to Party B. Does RCV likely result in 1A and 1B candidate winning? I guess, do those multiple candidates who are attractive to the majority party split that vote?
We wouldn't have vote splitting, but so if you're just electing two people, you're kind of you're at the threshold point for Party B here, where they're 35% of the electorate, and so they would deserve representation. And so the Party B would probably win one of those two seats, kind of depending on, if maybe some voters are ranking cross-party. But if people stuck within their factions, then yeah, you'd probably get representation for both of these two factions. And so when it's used within a party primary, like Arlington County is about to do, I foresee that the Democrats are going to nominate a balanced ticket. You're not going to nominate two identical Democratic nominees. You're probably going to get ones from kind of different factions of the Dem Party going forward into the general election.
And most of what we're talking about in Virginia at this point, certainly everything above the local level is about primaries. Somebody asked earlier if what we're talking about in Virginia is based on the Alaska model, and the short answer is no. Alaska has a whole suite of reforms where they have everybody run in the same primary, regardless of party affiliation, and the top 4 vote getters onto a general election where ranked choice voting is used. And that's why you saw 3 or 4 candidates in the general. For the local level, general election RCV is an option based on current Virginia law, but everything else that's being even discussed is about party primaries. So congressional, senatorial, gubernatorial, presidential, all of it, party primaries, which still doesn't help a third party candidate for anything above the local level. Now, again, there are a lot of ways to proceed forward with this, but at this point, that doesn't necessarily open that field up. But what it does do, as Deb just said, is it really offers you, if we're going to be stuck in a 2-party paradigm, then you can at least have different flavors of red and different flavors of blue, and you can have a more balanced spectrum of representation. All right. I think we might be about through. Oh, this is an interesting question from Dave. I'd be interested to hear what kind of additional information politicals are able to get from the lower vote cards. What do we learn the 2nd, 3rd, 4th place rankings?
Oh, well, I'm a data nerd. I absolutely love this.
What do you learn, Deb?
We see campaign consultants and strategists digging into this as well. I think one of the really helpful things for voters is once somebody wins with ranked choice voting, then they can see where their coalition came from. They can see, of all of the votes that I needed to win, 75% of those came from people who ranked me first. Great, that's a solid base of mine. But 25% of my voters were people who ranked like maybe this more progressive candidate first. And so I owe some of my winning coalition to this faction. And so I think having that connection in the minds of candidates and elected officials helps them understand what are their constituencies. And I think that helps drive policymaking. And so I think there is a lot of really good information buried in these vote transfer patterns. And typically the jurisdictions release full ranking data. It's, I think, part of so it's called a cast vote record. And to me, that's part of a transparent election and promotes election integrity, because it's this extra level of transparency in your election, allowing for external validation and analysis from people like me. That's just beyond the transparency that we typically get in a choose one election. So it's very cool stuff. I love the answers you can find from looking at those vote transfer patterns.
Well, right, because if you get a winner who had 35% of the vote on the first ballot in a plurality election, they would win, and all we would know is that 65% of the voters wanted someone else. We wouldn't know how much, how they feel about the winner. And this really elaborates on that. We just get so much more information about what voters want. The other thing I think that the candidates certainly in their campaigns are able to glean is what worked, what was an effective campaign message. I think a really good example of that is in the 10th congressional district in Virginia. The Republicans used ranked choice voting in 3 of their congressional nominating contests and the special election nominating contest for Congressional District 4 after John McEachin passed away, after Congressman McEachin passed away. And The 10th is the only one of them that was really at all competitive. But I think what's really interesting when you dig into that data is you see that Hung Kao, who ended up being the nominee, he was ahead on the first ballot, but every time it was eliminated and their votes were reallocated, the majority of the second place votes went to Hung Kao. He was the predominant second choice pick for every faction of the electorate. I think that's incredible. And his campaign, it was not a terribly negative campaign. It was a substantive discussion. And he did a lot of voter education. He did a lot of RCV education. He did a lot of appeals to people to rank him second. And I think that he can look back and see that that was very effective. He ended up overperforming in the district. I mean, he didn't win. It didn't end up being as competitive, I think, as some people thought it was going to be. But he did overperform. He did very well. He was a consensus candidate. So I think he probably was able to look at those numbers and go, all right, that's how you do this. That's how you do an RCV election. And I think the more candidates can look back and say, oh, attack ads aren't going to help me here. A substantive discussion helps me here. Voter education helps me here. These are all good things for voters, because hopefully Sarah Palin is looking back at her campaign and going, oh, the negative campaigning was bad. It did not actually help me. The incentive structure here is different. It used to be that's how you do a primary or that's how you do an election, and it just isn't in RCV. So, yes, the story of Jean Quan in Oakland in 2010. Deb, you probably know these numbers better than I do, but there was a candidate who was in first place for 9 ballots or something, but there were 2 women who made a coalition and they appealed to voters and they said, vote for one of us first and one of us second. We have similar values. We have similar priorities. We will represent you. And after 9 ballots, eventually they were in second and third place. The third place woman was eliminated and her votes were reallocated, and it was enough to push the second place candidate, Jean Quan, over the 50% threshold. So it was a rare example of the person being first after the first ballot, not ultimately winning. And it was this coalition and the broad appeal that Jean Quan had.
It's also an example of an election admin challenge. That was, when they first started using ranked choice, they waited almost a week before running the ranked choice tabulation at all. And so there was this clear coalition of people that wanted to elevate that kind of second choice candidate, but voters and candidates didn't see that for almost a week. And so it kind of set this false expectation, like that the other guy was going to win. And then when he didn't, it kind of, people had a lot of questions. And so when I give examples of San Francisco where they tabulate fast and they release their ranked choice data right away, it's stories like that kind of informs our recommendation. You want to give voters all of the information you have rather than sitting on info for a week.
Right, you want to set those expectations, and yeah. The more the results differ from voters' expectations, the more they're going to look for an explanation that maybe is outside the normal election procedures. All right, we are at an hour and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you all so much for joining us. What great questions. We will be doing a lot of programming like this, really trying to dig down on different aspects of ranked choice voting and just providing forums for folks to ask questions like these. They've just been so great. Deb, thank you so much. It's always a joy to pick your brain. And I hope you'll come back and join us again.
Thank you, Liz. This has been a lot of fun. And thank you, everybody, for all the really great questions. This was a delightful discussion.
Hey, I will get this recording out as soon as possible, and hopefully the chat will be along with it, and we'll send out some follow-up resources. So thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your Monday evening.